Angel Wren, and I'm speaking today to the author Chris Speck on behalf of Books and Beverages. And we have met Chris before. He was part of the Yorkshire Crime Festival that was held in July in Harrogate this year. Okay, so Chris, you write historical fiction. And some of it goes right back to the early 18th century. Some of it is much more up to date, First World War, Second World War, and even into the 60s. So what was it that first got you into writing and why?
There's a wonderful comic called 2000 AD. I don't know if you've ever read it. It's a wonderful sort of science fiction comic that used to be around basically from the 80s to the 90s. And I used to read it every week, and the stories were so fantastical and amazing that I always wanted to be a comic writer. So for many years, I used to try and write comics, and then I realized I couldn't draw, and so I started writing like books really. I mean, originally I always thought I'd be like a kind of fantasy or like a science fiction writer, but it turns out I'm not.
Okay, but you can't draw. I mean, surely when they're making comics, they have an artist who does the pictures, don't they? And
Yeah,
does
they
the writer
do.
just write the captions?
Yeah, you do. But I mean, it's a very much like writing a play or writing a script.
Mm.
You're writing the direction, and it's a different art form. I mean, you'll know as well, Angela, that writing plays is not kind of as exciting as writing books because
No,
you're giving direction, and it's a different thing. I'm not really very good at it. I think it needs a lot of training and work, and the same for comic writing as well. And it's going to be exciting, which I could probably do now, but my 13-year-old self writing to 2000 AD as I did every year with my own story for them, and it was rejected probably for 10 years. It wasn't so long ago that I actually stopped writing scripts for them and sending them to them.
oh, right, right. That's interesting. That's interesting. And okay, I've already mentioned that you write historical crime, but to what extent is some of it imagination, and how much research do you actually do?
Well, I mean, I do an awful lot of research, really. Not necessarily to get things right, although that's quite important. But often when you do research, it gives you all sorts of ideas into like what you can write. It gives you it's fuel for your imagination, basically. But I do try and get most things right. But I will play with some historical facts. I would never play with historical details like how much money something cost or what kind of shoes people wore or things that they would say or wouldn't say. I'd never mess around with that, but I might mess around with like some historical details. For example, I might decide that this battle didn't happen, or so I will take liberties. But generally, I try and stay focused on it, and especially the latest one, which is my Dark Waters book, which is here. This is about a steam trawler, a whole steam trawler called Kestrel, and it versus a German U-boat, the SMU-19. And the detail I had to go into research, especially U-boat, was quite in depth. I had to talk to quite a few people to try and get it right, and I know I haven't, but I've got an approximation of what I think might be right. So yeah, that was quite tough, and I tried to be faithful to the machine because and again the interest in the research makes it more interesting. It makes me enjoy it more as a writer, and I can tell you actually what it's like a bit more. So it's good. It's good fuel.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I agree with you. I'm my current work in progress is set in the 1980s, and believe it or not, the amount of research that I've had to do for that to make sure I've got everything accurate has been absolutely unbelievable. And of course, I'm terrible. I get into research, I find something, and then I'm immediately distracted, and I have to go down that rabbit hole, whether I really need to or not,
Yeah,
because I just find history absolutely fascinating. Always have done.
I agree with you. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. You find yourself reading books and watching things that you really shouldn't be, but they
Yeah,
fuel the story.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But going back to this Dark Water, I mean, my copy arrived. Was it on Saturday, I think? And I started reading it more or less immediately. And I've not quite got to the end, but I'm almost there. And I've got to say, whatever that research was you did about U-boats, it certainly came across to me as being totally real. and truthful. And I could feel the claustrophobia that,
Yeah.
that the men were coping with. But then I'm not very good in small spaces either, and I don't think I could ever work on a U-boat or a submarine ever, not ever. The thought of
No,
it
they're
is,
horrible. And don't forget, this is set in like 1915. So these
yeah,
U-boats at the time, they were like really cutting edge technology. But by what we've got now, they're just nothing more than tin cans under the water, really.
yeah,
Dreadful, dreadful equipment. Prone to going wrong. They had chlorine batteries that if they got wet, they would let off chlorine gas, which would kill you. You could only stay under the water, a couple of hours before you had to come up. Your cold was terrific.
yeah,
They were it was a death trap basically. So yeah, horrific. And I did spend a lot of time researching the U-boats. I wanted to go across to Germany to look at one, but I ended up speaking to a few people over the internet, and they told me all sorts of things. And I also ended up playing. There's a really good video game about U-boats, and I played that for quite a while, which is really helpful.
right. But we'll come back to your latest book in a minute. Um, so you write, you're writing novels at the moment, and you've mentioned already that you have an interest in writing scripts and writing comics, and realised that perhaps that wasn't the right forte for you.
Yeah,
What about other types of writing, other genres of writing, and maybe other forms of media? Like poetry, or have you done any performance pieces or anything like that?
well, I'm a musician as well, Angela. I play in a band called Black Kes, and we write all our music. They make me play the washboard in Black Kes, which is not very difficult. But I'm really a guitarist, so I write a lot of songs anyway. I always have, and I perform them around here sometimes, or in like noisy pubs. But yeah, and so songs. Yeah, I write a lot of songs. It's a real different genre for me. Poetry I find very hard to write. Although I know that songs are just like poetry to music, but I find it hard to write. But when I write a song, or we write a song in the band, we never write it down, and the words just get repeated and repeated and repeated, and that's how it becomes the song. It doesn't get written down on a bit of paper; it gets sung, and that's how we know if it sounds okay to us. But yeah, other writing. I write crime fiction as well. They do really well. Crime fiction set in Hull. They do really well. I write 18th century novels as well, which will do really well there. Set in a little village of Cherry Burton in the east the Wolds.
Yeah.
Miserable and bitter times.
Yes, I remember the first one of those, reading the first one of those for the Grand Festival in Harrogate, and the conditions that people were living in. It
Yeah.
was it was horrible, really horrible, and it made me wonder how on earth they could have survived, really. But clearly they did. Clearly they did.
Yeah. I think people in the past were tougher than we are, and we don't give them enough credit for being smart. They were really smart.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, I think you're right. They must have been really tough to survive those conditions. Because yeah, put me back in 1704 or 1709, and I'd just wimp out totally.
I think you'd be all right. You'd probably find that you'd be okay. You could stomach it, I think.
I'm not so sure. I like my comforts too much. Famous authors such as Roald Dahl and Dylan Thomas, they have a special space. They always had a special space for writing. What about you? Have you got your own writing shed or not?
I've got like a little space in the kitchen, but I can write anywhere, Angela. I don't care. There's no excuses. So I can write anyone, a crowded train, in a cafe. As long as there's noise, I can write. Um, but yeah, I think that what you can do if you're a writer and you want to get things done, you can say to yourself, look, I've got to have, the right pen. I've got to have the right light. I've got to have a drink with me. I've got to have this. And I think you're just sort of making up excuses for not writing. So there is no excuses. You must just sit and write wherever you are, and whatever the distractions are, you've got to just focus in on your writing. So no, I don't really have any special space. Although I always sit in the same place where I am now, but it's just because it's convenient and nobody. It's a tiny little corner where I am, and so nobody comes in this bit. Even though the kitchen's out there and people cook and make noise and do all sorts of stuff there.
Oh, right, right. Okay, let's go back to This Dark Water, which was only published on the 24th, wasn't it?
Yeah, last
Was
week. Yeah.
24th. And it's set in the 1914-18 war in the
Mhm.
North Sea. And from the vast majority of the pieces that I've read, it seems to me to be so realistic. And I couldn't help wondering if there might have been a real ship called the Kestrel that
There is,
sailed.
yes.
And, is your story based on that? And the U-boat, was there a real U-boat called U-19 in the First World War? And is the captain still the same captain? Have you used the same names or anything like that? Just tell me what was real and what wasn't.
So the Kestrel was a real ship. I don't know if it went sailing during the war. I don't know what happened to it, to be honest. But it was a real ship, and it did sail out of Hull, and it was a steam trawler. There wasn't a U-19 as well, and it actually did quite a lot of action. I think it sunk quite a few ships. It wasn't the most famous of the U-boats, but there was definitely a U-19. They went in order, by the way, so U-1 all the way up to like I think it's done U-500 now. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so they are real ships, but the people on them, they're not. They're not at all. I had to make up. Well, they are made up people, but they are people I've met or I know. Yeah, and sometimes they're a couple of people mashed together.
Oh, okay, okay. So there's a mum who has two boys in the book, isn't there? And she's quite a hard woman, isn't she? She's quite hard on her two sons, and one goes off to the front line, and the other one runs away to join the Kestrel. Never
Yeah.
worked on a trawler before, and I was just wondering, how did you create that mum in this book,
Sorry, how did I create that?
mother in this book?
Well, she's like someone I know very well, actually. I won't say who it is, but that's someone I know very well, the mother. That kind of it's that East Yorkshire sense of people don't show emotions here. They're very to the point. And emotions really they're not any use. Certainly for someone, the person that I based that character on, very much like my grandma, who was, she'd been in the Second World War, and she'd seen quite a lot of horrible things. She worked for an ambulance, and she used to drive an ambulance around Hull. So she was a no-nonsense sort of woman, yeah, and quite cruel sometimes, yeah, and exacting. So that character was based on her in lots of ways, and other people too. But yeah,
Ah,
it's easy. I'm sure you do the same, Angela. You kind of pick people, and you think, oh, this person might be a little bit like that person.
well, actually, no, I don't. I mean, I've worked on stage all my life, so I kind of create my characters from the shoes upwards and take all my clues from the scripts and the
Okay.
lines I have to learn. So when I stopped bothering to work on stage and started writing the novels, I started creating my characters in the same way because it just came naturally to me. And yeah, you're right. I do pinch bits and pieces of things, but as an actor, I always used to pinch bits and pieces of things. So I mean, I used to work with someone who did this with the specs all the time, kept on
You pitch that, yeah.
pushing them up her nose. And I found a character where I suddenly thought, oh, that works perfectly for him. So that got written into that particular character spec. And yeah, and I've seen people walk down the street in a particular way, and I think, oh, that's very distinctive. And so that I eventually find a character where that
Yeah,
fits. But basically, all my characters begin as an amorphous blob and then grow from that.
right.
But talking about your characters in This Dark Water, though, there was a fabulous moment in the book where the skipper is talking to the bosun, and he's talking about something that happened on his previous ship, where he lost a man overboard. He lost the dog first, because of course they've got a dog on ship, haven't they?
All ships have got dogs on them back in the day, or cats.
Really?
Yeah, definitely. Back in the 1920s, or even up into the 60s, the trawlermen would always take an animal.
Oh, right. I didn't know that.
Very much then.
I just thought that was really rather odd. And of course, then you've got a moment in the book, as I say, where the skipper is talking to the bosun, and he's talking about the dog fell over because of a vast wave. And
Yeah,
then the trawlerman who was trying to haul in the net, saw that the dog had gone another wave and he's gone, but they've
yeah.
managed to get the dog back. Oh, I found that so sad. And I thought that was so typical of the harshness of the job of working on the sea in the
Yeah,
first place. Secondly, working as a trawlerman.
yeah. Well, I mean, that's the skipper. Skipper Williams is a really cruel and horrible skipper. In the first book in this series, which is called it's called A North Sea Tale. The skipper is a lovely man who would you'd follow him to the gates of hell. So this time the skipper's horrible. And poor Skipper Williams, something really nasty's happened to him in his life, and something that emptied him of all his trust and joy. And so
Mm,
ever since that happened, he's been the kind of way he is. And he's not very superstitious, which is unlike most hull trawlermen. Hull trawlermen are very superstitious. But Skipper
mm,
Williams knows that the sea is too cruel to kill him.
mm.
She'd rather see him suffer. So he's not bothered by superstitions at all, which is odd because
Mm.
most people there really are.
I think people generally have a little bit of suspicion. They are a little bit suspicious of stuff, and they do have these suspicions that they carry with them from childhood.
Yeah,
But certainly from being up in Shetland last summer and being down on the south coast at various times, and living so close to the east coast and going to Bridlington and Scarborough and going around the museums, I've always been very much aware that people who fish and live on the sea and from the sea do seem to be especially suspicious, more so than the rest of us who are landlubbers, I think.
definitely. There's loads of superstitions that these guys carry with them all the time, and they're not made up.
No.
For example, you couldn't talk about anything green if you're on a trawler. Pigs are very bad luck. You could never wash your clothes on the day that you sailed. Very, very bad luck. Never whistle on a boat. And the list goes on and on and on, basically. There's loads of things that they do. And I explore that in the North Sea Tale a lot more than this one, actually. Yeah, but it kind of rules their lives in some ways out at sea. Because I mean, you are on the ocean, and if there's nothing you can really do, if the sea wants to, if you're going to die at sea, there's not a lot you can do about it. You know,
No, I
if a
do.
big wave turns you over, you're dead. You're gone.
You've only got that one chance, haven't you? And that's it. Your one chance is to get back to port, and that's all there
Yeah,
is. Because
yeah, yeah. Well, a lot of trawlermen couldn't swim either. They didn't know how to swim, and they wouldn't learn either because, well, there's no point. If you fall in the North Sea, if you're the best swimmer in the world, you're gonna freeze to death before you can get out.
yeah, yeah, that's
So
true.
they didn't swim a lot of them. Yeah. So and that's why they're so fatalistic because they sort of resign to the fact that a bit like samurai warriors. It's like I'm gonna may die doing this. So I've got
Mm,
to be kind of resigned to it, and yeah, and it gives this city as well. I know people don't quite realize, but it gives the city a sort of sense of dark sarcasm, really, and I think it comes from the fishermen.
mm, mm. But of course, fishing from Hull is a very long held tradition, isn't it? It goes right back to the Middle Ages,
Yeah,
probably
I mean,
early.
well, it's really big business, kind of like in the 18th century, 19th century, really big business then when they used to fish with smacks, big sailing ships, and then it kind of become an industrial process then. So that's when it really became big, and
Mm.
of course, it's all gone now.
Yeah, so it's just ferries and stuff, isn't it? Cruises and that kind of stuff mostly,
Yeah, yeah, a little bit of that.
and a fair bit of freight, I would expect.
Yeah, there is a fair bit of freight. Yeah, a lot comes into Hull from the world, really.
It's quite a big port, as I recall.
Yeah,
From
it certainly is a big port. I mean, there's several of them, and the biggest one is kind of out of town now. But yeah, there was many ports here over the years that have opened and closed and been developed.
hmm hmm Fascinating, fascinating. Okay, so coming back to the story then, and the characters, and we've mentioned the sea and how dangerous it is. And as I've been reading through your book, I found that the sea was there in the background all the time. This ever threatening shadow that seems to be there. And as I say, I haven't quite got to the end. So without spoiling the end for me, to what extent does the sea become much more sinister?
It doesn't really. It's always a sinister. It starts off being, she's cruel and unfair, and then she's cruel and unfair all the way through the book. So she doesn't change. It's not more sin anymore. She doesn't get any worse. She's just as cruel as she always was. So yeah, whatever you expect, that you'll find it in there. And interestingly enough, though, there was I did loads of research, talked to loads of historians about trawlers in the First World War. And the things that happened to in the book, a lot of them did happen to some of the trawlers. They did get, I won't ruin the story for you, but these things that where the Germans used to surface, right next to the ship and requisition them, and go on board and nab all their booze. They would do that.
Really?
They did it. I mean, and if you read the book, I mean that the story of I won't kind of spoil it, but that's straight out of a whole trawlerman's mouth. Got a really good, well, there's a friend of mine called Dr. Rob Robinson, who's a maritime historian here in Hull. And I went around his house one day to talk about this. We were there for hours, but he's got a tape recording. He's from Hessel Road, which is the fishing industry community in Hull. He's got a tape recording of his friend's dad, who was a skipper, telling the story of how he got, attacked by a German U-boat. And you sit, and this is the real guy telling you what happened. And so a lot of the stuff that actually he said on that tape, I just pinched.
All right, right. I do notice that the German U-boat commander has a conscience, doesn't he? Because
Of course,
he
yeah, yeah.
talks about letting, giving warnings so that people can get in the lifeboats and so on, and then he torpedoes the
Right.
ships.
Yeah, I mean these they're not animals at all, and these are honourable sailors, and killing people is not at all what they want to do. They want to win the war, but killing poor fishermen, no, 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 they're not like that. These are men of God. They're Christians. They're men of conscience. No, no, they're not. They won't do that. And so, I think you can forget about you can try and sort of dehumanize the enemy when actually these were really good and clever men
Yeah,
with great consciences.
yeah, yeah.
Which it makes it even sadder, really.
In some respects, yes, it does, because it then means that it just became a war of attrition, which we already know about in the trenches, but I'd never quite realised it was to the same extent, or more or less the same extent, on the sea.
Well, I mean, the battle at the sea was much more important than people realize. We had a huge blockade in the First World War, and it
Mm.
stopped Germany getting loads of food in. But they think something like 400,000 people died because they starved because they couldn't get any food in. It's one of the
Uh-huh.
main reasons why the Kaiser capitulated in the end because his country was on its knees. They had no provisions at all, and that was the sea blockade.
Uh-huh.
So it's a part of the war that some people don't really realize, and a part of the war that certainly in my part of the world, people don't really know that 100 years ago, maybe their grandfather or their great grandfather, they did that, and it was their sort of skills and know-how that enabled us to have that blockade and to do that what we did.
Mm. Mm. I mean, I've done my family research, and certainly, I have ancestors who fought in the First World War, but they were all in the army. So
Yeah,
my research has been all about what happened in the trenches. And of course, one of my ancestors was a coal hewer from Ireland, and he started out in the Fusiliers, and then he was very quickly moved because of his skills working underground.
right.
So he was put in a dangerous unit where they had to sneak in and put lay explosives and that sort of thing. So I must admit, I've got to confess that my research has been all about the land army from that
Yeah, of
period.
course. Well, that's what most people know. Yeah, it's yeah.
And certainly your book has really opened my eyes to other things that were going on at the same time. So,
Yeah. Well,
um,
originally I wanted to write a book about a whole minesweeper because the North Sea was just full of mines laid by us and the Kaiser's men, and so
yeah,
they used to take two trawlers who would sail and hook up these mines and then shoot them to blow them up. But I was going to write a book about that, but it's just incredibly boring and tedious and dangerous work. Couldn't find a story. Yeah, a horrific. But I mean, you make a mistake when you're doing that kind of thing. Everyone makes a mistake, and many many men died, and many ships sunk because they missed the mine. So
yeah.
yeah, I tried to write a book on that, but I just couldn't do it.
I can honestly say that the book that you have got is absolutely fascinating. It certainly kept my attention from the outset, and I also have to say that I found the structure quite interesting too, because we've got one family with the mother and the two sons, and then another person, and they're going to enlist, and suddenly they're all together on this boat, and that reminded me greatly of J.B. Priestley's festival at Fairbridge,
Right.
because that's what he does. He has all these characters, and suddenly they all come together for the big festival, and the action then continues from that point. So you've got everything that's happening in Hull all comes together there on the Kestrel. Then suddenly we move to the German U-boat, and you then get the action from that point of view. And I love the way you've done that. But I've still got the last section to read. That's so. Okay, so we know a fair bit of this. That story was based on truth, which has been quite interesting. And we're kind of running out of time now, Chris. So
Uh-huh.
I've got one more question for you.
Uh-huh.
So if you found yourself alone on a desert island with just enough battery power to make one call, who would you call and why?
It'll be a group call with my kids, I'm afraid. They're the only ones I'd want to speak to. So that they've trained me and taught me so much over the years. They're like 17 and 19 now, and they constantly teach me stuff and like make me look at the world in a different way. So I would call those guys.
Oh,
And
that's
if,
lovely.
if they picked up though, the chances of them picking up are slim because I don't know if you've seen what kids do. They look at the phones and they say, "Oh, it's my mum or it's my dad," and just put it down.
Yeah, they've got some to do.
Of course, they don't want to speak to your dad or your mum. Yeah, they're out busy living their lives.
Well, if you are ever lost on a desert island, I really do hope they pick up for you.
Thank you very much, Angela.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Chris. It's been great talking to you, and I could thoroughly recommend your book so far. And don't worry, by the time I finished it, I will write a review and post it as soon as I can. Okay,
Thank you very much, Angela. Thanks for your time and thanks for your incisive questions.
no problem. Bye bye.
See you. Bye.